There is a specific kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much work you actually did. You sit down at the end of the day and you feel drained, scattered, slightly behind, even though your to-do list looks almost the same as it did this morning. The tasks are still there. You did not ignore them. But somehow, just having them exist, just knowing they were waiting, wore you out. That feeling is not a personality flaw. It is something researchers have been studying for decades, and the explanation is more specific than most people realize. Most of us grow up with a simple mental model of stress. Hard tasks are stressful. Easy tasks are not. If you are tired, it means you worked hard. But this model breaks down pretty quickly when you look at your actual experience. You can spend a full afternoon doing almost nothing and still feel mentally exhausted. You can complete 3 hours of focused work and feel strangely calm. The problem is not the workload. The problem is what your brain is doing in the background while you are trying to live your life. When something is unfinished, your brain does not simply file it away and wait. Research in cognitive psychology has found that incomplete tasks create a kind of mental loop. Your brain keeps that task in an active, accessible state, not because it is being helpful, but because it is designed to flag unresolved things as potential threats to your goals. This was useful in environments where an unfinished action, like leaving a fire unattended, had real consequences. In a modern office or apartment, it mostly just hums in the background and quietly drains your attention. This phenomenon has a name in psychology. It is often referred to as the Zeigarnik effect, after the researcher who first documented that people tend to remember interrupted tasks more vividly than completed ones. The brain treats an open loop as something that still requires attention. It does not switch off just because you switch tabs. The important thing to understand is that keeping tasks in your head is not passive. It feels like you are just holding information, like writing something on a mental notepad. But what is actually happening is more like leaving multiple browser tabs open on a slow computer. Each one is using processing power. Each one is quietly competing for a share of your available attention, even when you are not actively thinking about them. This shows up in everyday life in ways that are easy to miss. You are making coffee in the morning, and somewhere in the back of your mind, you are rehearsing a work email you have not written yet. You are in a conversation with someone, and part of your attention is on the 3 things you need to do before noon. You are trying to read, and instead of reading, you are half thinking about whether you responded to that message. None of these things feel like stress in the traditional sense. There is no physical tension, no obvious anxiety. But each one is a small tax on your cognitive resources, and they add up across a day. The reason this feels worse than the tasks themselves is that the tasks, once you actually start them, have a beginning and an end. They demand your full attention for a defined period of time, and then they are done. The mental version of those same tasks has no structure. It can show up at any moment. It does not resolve itself, and because it is vague rather than concrete, it tends to feel larger than it actually is. A task sitting in your head is not a task. It is an unspecified obligation with no boundaries, no timeline, and no clear completion state. Research in attention and cognitive load supports this. When your working memory is occupied by unresolved items, your ability to focus on what is in front of you is reduced. It is not that you cannot function. It is that you are functioning with fewer available resources than you would have if those loops were closed. The work feels harder than it should. Your patience wears thin more quickly. Small decisions feel heavier. And at the end of the day, you feel like you ran a race you do not remember starting. There is also something uncomfortable about what this reveals. Most people assume they are keeping tasks in their head because they have good memory, or because they like to stay flexible, or because writing things down feels like more effort than it is worth. But research suggests the opposite is often true. Holding tasks mentally does not free you up. It consumes you quietly. The feeling of being organized by keeping it all in your mind is, in many cases, the feeling of cognitive overload presenting itself as control. This is not about intelligence or discipline. People who are highly capable, people who manage complex responsibilities and perform well under pressure, experience this in the same way. The brain does not get better at holding open loops just because you are smart or experienced. It simply holds more of them, which means the tax is just as real, often more so. It is worth being clear about what this does not mean. This is not an argument that written lists solve the problem of stress, or that organizing your tasks will fix your relationship with work. There is a whole separate conversation about why people feel overwhelmed even when they do use systems, about why the anxiety around productivity is often not really about productivity at all, And none of what has been described here is a clinical diagnosis or a statement about mental health. It is a description of a normal cognitive process that happens to most people, most of the time. It also does not mean that thinking about your work is inherently harmful. Planning, anticipating, mentally rehearsing, these are useful. The issue is specifically the unresolved, unstructured kind of mental holding. The kind where a task exists in your awareness but has no clear form, no defined action, and no natural completion point. That is the version that costs more than it should. What is worth sitting with is how normalized this has become. The feeling of low-level mental noise throughout the day, the background hum of things to do, is so common that most people treat it as the default state of being a functioning adult. It is not something they question. It is just what being busy feels like. But business and cognitive overload are not the same thing, and conflating them means the actual source of the exhaustion stays invisible. Most people, when they feel tired and scattered, blame themselves. They think they need more motivation, or better habits, or more sleep, or a cleaner workspace. Some of those things may matter, but the specific tiredness that comes from carrying tasks mentally, from keeping a dozen open loops running quietly in the background, that tiredness has a different source. And the first step to understanding it is just recognizing that it is real, and that it is not about you failing at something. The tasks were never really the problem. They were just the most visible part of something that was mostly happening out of sight.